All right, let's get into some Ohio State Marshall. Andrew, Ohio State coming into this one, they were off on a bye last week. The tandem of Quinshon Judkins and Trevion Henderson has seemed to be very powerful so far this season. Freshman wide receiver Jeremiah Smith has had a very good year. He had a couple drops in the first game, but last game he was highly effective, outran everybody. Now, Ohio State's not played anybody good. They played Akron and Western Michigan, so it's hard to really gauge, how good they are. But with the hype coming into the season, you had former coaches saying this could be the most talented team in college football in recent years. You have a lot of people feeling very good about Ohio State and their chances to win the conference this year. Michigan does not look nearly like anything like the team they have been the past few years, so that opens up the door for Ohio State to win the conference. What's your thoughts on Ohio State so far this season, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at this team, I mean, they're firing on all cylinders right now, like you'd expect Ohio State to be early on in the season, especially against some weaker non-con competition. They're averaging more than 50 points per game. Jeremiah Smith, like you mentioned, just looks like an absolute monster. Just signed that NIL deal with Red Bull, so I guess that's been giving him some wings, and he's been flexing them on the field here. But yeah, outside of that, though, they're playing some very good defense right now. Like you said, they ran the ball extremely well against Western Michigan. Quinshon Judkins and Trevion Henderson look like just an absolute monster duo. That's going to be nightmares for defensive coordinators to try and plan for. So, I just think that Ohio State looks like, the kind of team that everybody was expecting them to look like, with their retention of the talent and just kind of the renewed focus after losing again to Michigan. Like, they made it a mission to be dominant in this season, and so far so good.
Yeah, they really started taking that Michigan model from last year, not the sign stealing stuff. Doesn't appear they did that, but the model of bringing your players back and having older players on your team and doing that kind of stuff really seems like they've taken this to heart. And you can tell that this team is much more experienced, and there's a lot of guys on this team that have had a lot of experience playing college football. And I think it's really interesting as well. They're getting a lot of young guys in as well. They had a 55-yard touchdown pass from true freshman quarterback last week to one of the younger tight ends, Bennett Christian, I think is who it was. So that was interesting for Ohio State to really get their younger guys in, but they've not just been rotating them in at the end of the game, that you've been seeing them in the beginning of the games as well. We'll see if that continues as they play tougher opponents. But Andrew, give me, a player or a position group you feel like needs to perform well for Ohio State. Maybe not that they've been performing bad or anything, but you just feel like this is a player or position group you want to see do well in this matchup against Marshall.
Yeah, so I'm actually looking at the defensive line, and I'm looking at the interior with guys like Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton. And the reason why I wanted to point them out is because Charles Huff, head coach of Marshall, his background is in running backs. He coached Saquon Barkley and Miles Sanders at Penn State. So if you ask either one of those guys, they have all the love in the world for Charles for Huff. And Marshall is averaging around 200 yards per rushing per game so far this season. And so I think if Ohio State shuts that down, I think they'll be in pretty good shape. And I think they definitely have the talent to do so. But that's like one matchup where I'm kind of looking at them to say, okay, as long as they're doing that and they're forcing them to throw the ball, I think they'll be just fine. I think they'll be just fine regardless. But that's just one that I think I'll have my eye on to say, okay, how does this is this immensely in Ohio State's favor, or will this kind of be like a back and forth sort of situation?
Yeah, I don't really have any concern about Ohio State winning the game, obviously. I do think Marshall is probably the best opponent they faced so far. I think that Charles Huff has done a really good job with this team, and Marshall has been known in the past to get some really good players. I think that Charles Huff has shored up this defensive line on this team, and it's probably one of the better defensive lines in the group of five. So it's going to be interesting for Ohio State to see if the run blocking and stuff can continue on from Western Michigan last week, not last week, 2 weeks ago, because they were on a bye last week. However, they do bring back their All-American guard and Donovan Jackson, who was injured the first 2 weeks and sounded like he could have possibly gone in the second week, but they held him out, just kind of being precautionary, which makes sense. I mean, you're going to bring a guy back before you get into the Big Ten play, even though Michigan State doesn't look like a national championship contender. They're still a Big Ten team, and hey, they're at the top of the conference right now with Indiana, 1-0. So, you got to respect that at least, right? So, so we'll see if the offensive line for Ohio State can continue the run blocking. This was the biggest question mark going into the year, so it was very encouraging, I'm sure, for everybody to see them do well against. Well, I shouldn't say everybody, every Ohio State fan, for to see them do well against the Western Michigan defensive line. But I think this Marshall defensive line is possibly going to give them some more headaches. So we'll see. Going to get to Doug Shepard's comments really fast, and then we'll do score predictions. Doug says we brought almost everybody back, and also brought in new young talent at the same time. Took in good transfers. Yeah, Quinshon Judkins, Caleb Downs, Will Howard was a bit of a question mark for some people. I believed in him. I thought he was going to do a good job, and so far he's done a good job there. I hope there isn't any chemistry issues on the offensive line since Donovan hasn't played a game next to South before. I agree. I think, that's why you bring back one of your guards in this game and not during the Michigan State game, because you kind of want that chemistry to start gelling and going and doing that. So we'll see. We'll see in this game how it goes. I tend to believe Donovan Jackson, All-American, he should be just fine. I don't have too many concerns, but you're right. The chemistry is definitely something you want to look at. All right, Andrew. I did a lot of talking, so why don't you give us your score prediction?
Yeah, so I think Ohio State wins this one pretty convincingly for all the reasons that we've already discussed. I think they win this one 52-10.
52-10. All right. I have mine, but I forgot to write it down on my notes, so let me look it up really fast. All right, my score prediction in this one was 45-3. So I wonder if maybe because you were talking about the running backs for Marshall and some of that stuff. I wonder if maybe at the beginning of the game Marshall kind of really leans into that rushing attack and tries to bleed the clock a little bit more. Ohio State has not allowed a team into the red zone so far this season yet, so I don't know if I'm going to predict that to happen, but I do think that Marshall is going to move the ball a little bit enough to get 3 points in this one. And even though I don't think they'll be moving the ball up and down the field, I do think they're going to try to hold on to it, keep the Ohio State offense off the field. And you're going to need to see big plays from Ohio State's offense, or you're going to need to see some turnovers for touchdowns in order for them to get there. Doug is giving his prediction. He says 56-3. They aren't getting a touchdown. I tend to think the same thing. I think, Marshall, all the respect in the world for him, but I think that this Ohio State defense is just really, really good, and it's going to be hard for Marshall to score on them.